this introductory training to clock creation and management. We're going to be going through exactly how to create clocks, how to create stage displays, because stage displays are very closely related to clocks. Then we're going to be talking about how to edit those clocks and how to quickly adjust your clocks for the service that you're going through and how to think through that. So the first thing that we want to do is to look at the cue sheet for the Sunday or the service that you're looking at. This could be for a movement, it could be for a standalone service like women's night, men's night, etc. Whatever the service is going to be, it could be a worship night, it could be anything. Any service that is going to happen, we're going to need clocks for. And there's a couple of different reasons that we need clocks. Basically, we need clocks to keep our teams on track so that we're able to join up point to point when we need to. It's also helpful for whenever there's a speaking moment to keep that moment timed to where it needs to be, so that way we're able to execute and join up point to point later on, or just to keep service at an overall length. So basically, whenever there is a each service is going to be broken down into different segments, and then between those segments are transitions, and having accurate clocks helps us to hit those transitions smoothly. So clocks are honestly one of the most important things to have accurate. It's the most important thing across the entire service. Without accurate clocks, we're not going to be able to link up with other campuses. Without accurate clocks, we're not able to have a service that's within our desired 65 minutes. So all those things are incredibly important, and that's why we're thinking through clocks right now. So with that being said, let's go ahead and use our upcoming Sunday, the 27th of October, 2019. We're going to use that as an example. Right now, our services are pretty fluid as far as the flow. They're changing from week to week, and that's pretty awesome because it means that we are able to do whatever the next Sunday needs. We're able to design a service flow that's specific for that Sunday. We're not locked into a specific service flow, and so there's a lot of advantages to that, but there also is some challenges on making clocks happen. And so let's talk through and think through some of those challenges, so that way we can be confident going in and supporting the service flows that are changing with accurate clocks. All right, so first off, we're going to look at what the service flow looks like. Usually by the time that we look at clocks and are making clocks, there is going to be some sort of like description of how the clock should be written. This is really good to look at, but you should be able to look through the cue sheet and figure out where the clock should go based on just reading the cue sheet. So the first little thing that we're going to talk about is how to read the cue sheet, and then we're going to talk through, and then I'm going to show, basically, I'm going to prove kind of like a math problem. Sometimes, I don't know, I don't necessarily like math, but the one part that I did like about it was when you could prove a theorem or an equation, and you could walk through and show that, you know, what we do is there's a reason for it. There's a reason for everything. So basically, these are the suggested clocks, and then I can go through the cue sheet and prove each time based on what's in the cue sheet. So we'll start off with looking through basically the cue sheet and figuring out where we need to have clocks. So the first thing I'm noticing here is on the first song, it's 3 minutes and 11 seconds for that Keep Shining, our song 1. At the end, worship leader welcomes first-time guests and seats for news. In parentheses here, it says 10 seconds. So we know that this song and the welcome moment that's going to be included in this song is going to be 3 minutes and 21 seconds. So that's 311 plus 10, 321. Quick aside here. If you don't have it already, I'm going to be putting a link in the description of this video for an app. It's called TimeCalc. It's pretty straightforward. It's easy to use. I know personally, adding up second intervals and trying to keep, you know, units of 60 in my mind is a little bit difficult. Base unit of 6 instead of a base unit of 10, you know, time and all that. So using a calculator that is going to calculate that for you automatically will help mitigate any errors that you'd make and speed through your process in creating clocks. So we can show basically by reading through the cue sheet that we were able to decipher that song 1 plus worship welcome equals 321. That's what we came up with automatically there. The next step is worship flow of 603. Let's look through and see how that happened. So 311, and I'm actually using the TimeCalc app on my phone right now to do this. 3 3 minutes and 21 seconds, including the 10-second welcome. We're going to add news of 1 minute and 42 seconds. We're also going to add in 1 minute of scripture reading that's here. And that's going to equal 6:03. Now, what this clock is going to do is we try to always fire clocks at once. We try to fire all the clocks at once. We try to avoid firing clocks later on in the service. There's a couple of exceptions, but for the most part, we want to fire the clocks all at the very beginning of the service. And then we're going to take advantage of stage displays and basically change the layers of the clocks so that we're going to display the clock that needs to be displayed first. And then after that's over, we're going to switch the display to the next clock and so on and so forth. So all the clocks are starting at once and we're just showing the different clocks at different times. So 6 minutes and 3 seconds is going to include Keep Shining, the 10-second for the welcome, the news, and the scripture reading. And basically what that means is that at the start of the scripture reading, there's going to be 1 minute, 60 seconds that's going to be counting down to the end of that. And that allows all of our campuses to start King of Kings at this exact same time. So they're able to start King of Kings at the exact same time. And then we're going to go ahead and figure out what our next clock is. It looks like it's 4:22 plus 7:39. So let's go ahead and add that up. Or plus 6:03. So that's 4 minutes, 22 seconds. And then 7 minutes and 39 seconds. So that's 18:04. We'll go back up at the top. So the reason it says 21:04 is that we're actually going to add 3 minutes to the welcome. And that's 21:04. So I hope that makes sense, the way that's working. So basically what's going to happen is as soon as this clock runs all the way through, we get into King of Kings. As we start King of Kings, we're going to put up a clock that has the remaining amount of time so that all the way to the end of the local ministry time will be displayed as soon as we start King of Kings. So when we get to the end of nothing else, there'll be 3 minutes left for local ministry time. Then the next clock is obviously a meet and greet. That's 30 seconds. We fire that individually because the local ministry time, it may go 10 seconds long, it may go 10 seconds short. We want to make sure it's obviously happening on time, but we also understand that this is less controlled to the start of service than the other times. So that one is going to be fired individually. And then the message clock is going to be fired at the end of that 30-second clock. We're going to fire a 35-minute message clock. Now, for this week, it is a pre-record, so it's not as critical to have that 35-minute message clock because no one's going to be on the stage. But it's also extremely important to figure out exactly how, by the time you're walking in on Sunday morning, 6 o'clock, 5:30, 6:30, whatever time you get to your campus, by the time you're walking in and you're sitting down in front of the CG screen, you know how long this message pre-record is, and so you're able to basically replace 35 minutes with 34, 36, whatever it is, and you're able to put that in there, and you can fire that when you fire the message. And what that does is it allows everybody to understand how long the message is, for someone who's closing, et cetera, et cetera. So it really just gives the information that we're trying to give, and helps everyone stay on track. So it's always important, and it may be a little bit more important when there's someone, speaking live to do that. But it's also important to do the message clock, even at a receiving location during a normal Sunday, because this can be helpful. So don't ignore this this clock here. Then we go into next steps. Part 1, that's going to be a minute, so we're going to need to have a minute clock. And then part 2 is going to be 3 minutes. So basically what we need to do is we need to have a 1 minute clock and a 3 minute clock for closing. And we actually don't need the 5 minute clock because the gospel will be included in the message. So that's different for this week. And then we don't need to necessarily have a minute timer for the band to play out because they will play out for as long as they have in their set, and then they're going to go ahead and close, and then we can transition like we normally do. So let's go ahead and jump into creating the clocks. We're going to refer back to this area right here, and then 65 minutes is the total service time. We'll refer back to this as a kind of a cheat sheet since we've proved all of the times, and we know that they're accurate and we're happy with them. So let's go ahead and jump into it. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to build a playlist file. I'm going to go ahead and delete this so you guys know exactly how to do it. So you click the plus button here, and then you say new playlist. And then we're going to call this, just in all caps, do not delete, so that people know not to delete it. And then afterwards you can say clock fire. And then what I do is I put this at the very top, just drag and drop. And this will allow you to save all of your clock fires in one place. And then when you get a new build downloaded, I'll show you how to drag and drop them in. I've got the file here for the 27th, so we'll build it out before the training is over so you guys can actually see what's going on. So we're going to go ahead and open up a new document. So we're going to go ahead and just basically do all of our song fires. So this one is going to be, let's go ahead and take a look. So we're going to have a 1 o'clock, that's one slide rather, that's going to fire our first clocks here. So we'll call this one first clock fire, because we want to make these names as nondescript as possible, because there could be and we'll do 1920 by 1080. That's actually the resolution that we have, so we want to make sure it's accurate. So we're making the names as nondescript as possible. Once you've created it, you basically just drag it into the document frame, and there you go. We have our first clock fire. We'll go ahead and edit the slide to make sure that we are, not sure why that's in there, but that's fine. Go ahead and delete all that. We don't need that. It's basically just a blank slide that we can put what we need to put onto it, which we'll do in just 1 second. But we'll go ahead and build out all the slides that we think we need for the Sunday. So the next thing we're going to need to do is we're going to need to swap clocks here after the first song, and it's going to be into the news, into the scripture reading. So we'll call this one worship flow, because that's a nondescript name that can be modified for a bunch of different uses. That's what we're basically going for. So we'll call this one worship flow clock. That's what it was. Let's go to all right. So we've got our worship flow clock and our first clock fire. Let's keep going. So we have our local ministry time clock. That is a consistent, that's something that's pretty consistent and repeatable. So we'll definitely call that that. Local ministry clock fire. And again, we're going to drag and drop it into the document folder or table or display or whatever you're going to call it. And then we'll check again for our next clock. We have our meet and greet, which is 30 seconds. And that's a special situation because we actually have that built into the local ministry moment portion. It's actually built in right here. With this, so it actually will fire it, so it's already built in, so you don't necessarily have to worry about the meet and greet. You just have to make sure that you're pulling that point to point. It should already be created for you pretty much in every situation. You don't necessarily have to worry about that as far as the introductory level goes. We'll have an advanced training later that you can take a little bit more deeper dive on this, but yeah. Then we have the overall service clock, which we don't need a new fire for because that's going to fire off the first one. The only thing we're missing is the message. So let's go back to our do not delete clock fire settings, and then we will create, and closing as well. I forgot about closing. So we will say this is the message clock fire. Drag that in, and then we're going to add in the closing clock fires. And we'll call it fires because there's almost always a choice or 2 or 3 clocks to be fired here. So we want to be accurate with our language. So our first clock fire, our worship flow clock, local ministry clock fire, message clock fire, closing clock fires. Let's go ahead and open up our clocks. You can do Control C, or you can click. Sometimes there's a clock up here that you can click. It's not showing on my ProPresenter, or you can click View and drop down to Clocks, Timers, whichever one you do. I always use Control C. I'm gonna go ahead and just delete all these clocks so you guys can see me creating them. Now, real quick, you want to make sure that you have this selected. If you have this selected, it will show the seconds on your stage display. If you have this selected, it won't show seconds on your stage display. So whatever you select here is going to show up on your stage display. So that's where you change it. And if you want to put seconds in, you can, or you can do no seconds. I prefer no seconds, but sometimes seconds are preferred. So just check with your production director and make sure you are understanding what the need is for your campus and making sure it's happening. So that's where you change it, and just follow your production director's direction. Okay, so we click the plus button here. We come up with the basic clock, just this timer. There's nothing filled out. So the first thing we have to do is name it. The first thing we need is our total service clock. So we'll just call this service. The service time right now, and this is like everything, our mission is to seek those who we like to check overrun. The reason we like to check overrun, sorry, I'm changing the subject here, is so that if we go over the service, that there's a negative that's being displayed, and it counts, -1 second, -2, on up. So the reason that our 65-minute timer, all these things are subject to change, is that our mission is to help those who are far from God to become fully alive in Christ. That's our mission. But what we do to accomplish that mission is subject to change. So nothing is sacred except the mission. And that's something we just need to remember. All right, so we have our service time. Let's go ahead and double check and see what times we have left to build. So we did the service one. We need to go ahead and do our song 1 in Worship Leader Welcome. That's 3:21. So let's just go ahead, and for this Sunday, we'll go ahead and just create clocks that make sense and that the names make sense. Building out this do not delete clock fire, you want to make names that are nondescript, that kind of can cover multiple things. But for this, you actually want to be as descriptive as you can so that it makes sense when you're building it. So this is 3 minutes and 21 seconds. Our next timer is going to be 6:03, if I remember correctly. Let's see what it's called here. Worship flow. Let's go back. Let's actually change this. Worship flow. And our next one is going to be local ministry time. This is 21:03, I think. Probably not. Let me see. Let's double check. Always double check your clocks. 21:04, close, but no cigar. 21:04. Okay, so now we're looking good. These are the main clocks, and then we're going to add in another one. If you can't see them, if you want them to all be on one screen, you can always, make it bigger. Closing part 1. This is 1 minute. And then we're going to do closing part 2. This is going to be 3 minutes. And then we're going to look basically at what needs to be overrun. Local ministry time needs to be overrun. If they go long, they need to know how long they're going. We also need a message clock. Let's put that in. Basically, all of these clocks can be overrun because we are changing clocks and putting new ones up as soon as they're over. So if they do go long, it's important to remind whoever is on the stage where we are at so that we can move to the next portion in a timely manner. We want to give information to the stage that's accurate at all times, and those who are operating, either giving the message or leading worship or doing a host moment, once they've been given the platform, and it's up to them to make the transition. It's not up to us to remind them of their time, but we also at the same time need to give accurate information so they can make a decision based on the trust that's been given them by pastor or if it's pastor himself. We basically we are serving the people who are on the platform in the sense of we are giving them accurate information with our clocks, but it's not up to us to decide whether or not they need to move on to the next portion of the service. We just need to, feedback can happen afterwards, but not during for sure. So just a quick aside there. So let's go ahead and create our clocks. We've created our clocks. We've created our fires. So now we basically just need to program our fires. So we're going to right click on the slide. You can either control click, you can use 2 fingers on the laptop touchpad, or if you have a mouse, it's a right click. You're going to go to add a queue. We're going to add a timer queue, and we're going to add in the service queue for this one. We're going to add in another timer queue. This is going to be song 1 with the worship leader welcome. Remember, we're adding a lot of these cues to that first song because a lot of these things are happening off the first song. Worship flow, and then we're going to add in the local ministry time. All those should be coming off of the first clock. And then we're going to go to our next one, and that's worship flow, so we don't need one. Local ministry clock, we don't need that. Let's see, was there a specific? Nope, I think that's good. Message, we can put one here. So we'll go to timer queue again. This is the message clock. We'll put that there. And then we'll go here to, we actually need to copy this because we're going to have 2 different fires. So we're going to go ahead and go to group label. We're going to say none. So we'll take group off of it. And then we can name this one by doing slide label, clicking other. We're going to uncheck save label, and we're going to say closing part 1. And then we'll do the same thing on the second slide. We're going to go to a slide label, say other, uncheck save label, closing part 2. All right, so now we've got our, let's go ahead and add the timers real quick since we're here. Timer queue, closing part 1. So it's add queue, timer queue, and then select the clock. So it's closing part 2. All right, so now we have all our clocks listed, but we don't have any way to display what we have fired onto the screen. So let's go ahead and start making stage displays. So we'll go here, click on window. It's Command 4 is also how you get there, but you can always go to window and then configure stage display. So we'll go ahead and open that up. This is your default setting. This is how everything looks. This is your clock bank here. All the clocks that you've created are going to be here. And then these are the basic options that you have. So let's go ahead and do a couple of modifications. We don't need slide notes, so we'll uncheck those. We don't use chord charts. We don't currently use the message. And we will use an overrun color of red. Red's already pre-selected, that's fine. So those are some basic options. The next thing that you want to do is for the current and next slide, you want to change the size. I believe 120 is the size that we use currently. If that looks wrong, we'll go ahead and test a lyric to make sure. We'll change it, but that's how you change the size of the text that's displayed inside of those things. Okay, so then we have to select the clocks that we're going to be firing, which we'll do that shortly. We're going to go ahead first and move everything around kind of how we want it to be. So video countdown is important to have in your slide for when you are doing the news, local fire the news. It's also nice to have when you're firing, which is coming up very soon for at the movies, be able to fire that accurately. So what I'm basically doing is I'm just putting the next slide at the bottom and making it long so that you can see the text very easily. This is probably the most efficient way to display lyrics on the confidence monitor because we are just showing the two lyrics that we need to show. So making this one just a little bit smaller, this one just a little bit bigger because the current slide is the one that's more important. Clock goes on this side. We'll go ahead and make that a little bit bigger so it's easier to see. Now, clocks, we'll talk about colors here in a second. As we're going to go in here in a second and actually, that's probably easier. Oops, the wrong one. So we'll go ahead and put video countdown here. Doesn't necessarily have to be big. It's just for information, so everyone who's able to see the confidence monitor can see how long is left in the video. So it's not as important or crucial. This clock is also not as important or crucial. We want the service clock to be big. We want the other clock to be big. Real quick before we do that, see this clock right here. This is the clock that is your time of day clock. It's white right now. We actually want the time of day clock to be yellow. All of our clocks have colors, and I'll show you what those are in a second. Here's our service clock, and then we are going to select the first clock that we're going to use, which is song 1, which worship leader welcome, and then we can go ahead and click this down. So song 1, worship leader welcome, that's going to be over here. The service clock is going to be over here. So we'll go ahead and put this right here, and then we'll basically just make it, roughly about half of the distance that's there. That's probably pretty good right there. And then we'll put this in the top right corner, top left corner rather, and fill the remaining space up. Alrighty. So then what we're going to do is we're going to say remove hour zeros so that there are no zeros for an hour. And then we're going to change some of the colors. So the way you change colors is it's hard to see because it's not like super easy to tell, but right here, this little box, it's the same type of box right here, and that's how you can change your colors. So we'll click on this service. We'll change the service to green. This, if you guys, this is, and we'll leave the far left clock white. The service clock is always green. Basically what this does is anyone who's used to our clocks at LifePoint will know service clock is green, time of day clock is yellow, the clock that they need to be making their next transition at is white. That's how it always goes, and that consistency helps provide confidence, which was what we're all about. So we've made our first clock. This one is going to be our first stage display rather, and this one we'll just call it what the clock is because that's what it's displaying. All right, so now we've made our first clock. To keep the consistency of everything that's changing, because the only thing that's going to change for our next clock is we're going to change what's here in this top left corner. Everything else is going to be consistent all the way throughout, except for when we get to the message, because pastor's message confidence monitor looks a little different than everything else. But we're going to duplicate this button here, duplicates. You can see switching through, they're exactly identical. We'll change the name shortly, but let's go ahead and build out the next one. So worship flow, the 6 minute 3 seconds. We uncheck the song 1. It disappears. We put worship flow where it was in this place. And now it's pretty much identical to the first clock, except it's displaying the information that we want. So when we change from clock to clock, it's not going to be, visually jarring or hard to follow from the stage, which is exactly what we want. So we'll go ahead and rename this one what the clock is. We'll rename this one worship flow. And we'll do that for the remainder of the clocks. So we'll duplicate this, and then we'll uncheck it, and this one becomes local ministry time. We'll go ahead and duplicate it first. This is local ministry time. Worship flow. Well, we're renaming this to the next thing, which is actually going to be the message. And again, let's go ahead and build that one out. So for the message, basically the current and next slide, because we're not displaying lyrics, become less important. So we're going to go ahead and change the size of those. We're going to still keep them because we can display, confidence of what the notes are, that type of thing. So there's a use for it, but it's less useful than, we forgot to undo local ministry time. We'll take that off. Less useful than what's happening. So we'll go ahead and the service clock we'll go ahead and put here. We'll keep it roughly the same size. And then we'll go ahead and make the message clock take the majority of the screen, so it's extremely easy to see and to follow. Next, we will build our next clock, but we're going to copy this one because that's the one we're actually interested in. Local ministry time copy, so we'll undo the ministry time, and then we'll do this one closing part 1. And then we'll duplicate that. And again, we'll call this closing part 2. We'll uncheck the closing one and put closing 2. Move this to where it's supposed to go. And the last thing we can do is think about where videos are happening for our service and basically adjust the video countdown clock, that type of thing. So for the song 1, Worship Leader Welcome, this is going into the news, so we're definitely going to leave it there. For the worship flow, let me just remember exactly. Yeah, this is going into news, so we'll leave it on that one. We actually yes, so we're probably going to keep this fire happening because there's not necessarily a transition time to click a new clock before news happens, but we'll definitely be clicking a new clock out of news. So we'll keep the video countdown in the first clock, but it won't need to be in the remainder of the clocks. There is an After Movies trailer, which will need to have the video clock in the next steps part 1, closing part 1. So that's important. So let's go back and just make sure that we've fixed that. So we're in our worship leader welcome, our worship leader flow. We will not need the video countdown. We will not need video countdown in local ministry time. We won't need it in message. We will need it in closing part 1. We will not need it in closing part 2. So now let's go ahead and edit everything that we've done as far as the areas where it's not needed. And the easiest way to edit it, to just kind of fill the space out, is just to drop this down just to keep it consistent and making it look nice, but it really doesn't necessarily change it. Local ministry time is the next one. Go ahead and bring that down. And the other thing that you can do as well is you can adjust this, like that, and drag the clock down to kind of centered a little bit more. That's also an option. It's up to you, kind of aesthetically, what you're going for. I think that looks a little bit nicer personally, so I'm going to go ahead and change to that standard as we're talking about it. The message again. So there's this one, we can actually fill this time up right here. So that looks a lot cleaner, a lot better than it was before. That's what we're looking for. We're kind of cleaning everything up as we're kind of putting our finishing touches on this. Part 2, again, we'll just drop this one down a little bit. So now we're looking pretty solid as far as where we are with all of our displays. Once we finished all of our displays, we can go into building out all of our displays. So the same thing we did before, we're going to add a queue, and then we're going to add a stage display layout. Now we have all of our layouts that we've labeled here. So this is going to be very easy. Song 1, worship leader welcome. That's our first one. Then we're going to go into worship flow clock, worship flow, local ministry, message, closing part 1. And closing part 2. And that is literally how easy it is. We're done with all of our clocks. So setting up all of your program clocks is the part that takes the time. But once you have these set up right here, and you have your basic, clocks set up here, and you go in and you set up your basic stage displays here, everything is just editing. And editing takes a lot less time than building it all out is, like I just did. So you won't have to take the entire length of the training that we just did to build out your clocks. Should be a lot quicker. So last thing, I'll show you how to put them into the build. So let's say you just downloaded the Sunday build. This is what it would look like if you were at an IMAG campus. So let's just go ahead and assume that that's the case. If you were at a non-IMAG campus, it would be the exact same because these clock fires are identical. We're going to go ahead and drag in our first clock fire. We're going to drag in our worship flow clock. We'll drag in our local ministry clock fire, our message clock fire, and our closing clock fires. So as you can see, I'm basically just dragging and dropping all the clock fires into this, and they're going to automatically put them at the bottom. So now we just have to think about where they're supposed to go. Our first clock fire is going to happen before our first song, which is Keep Shining. So we'll put that right there. Think about where our next one is. This is the worship flow clock. That's going to happen right after news. So we'll switch to that. Then we'll go to our next clock fire. This is local ministry. Local ministry will happen after our last song, before the local ministry moment. So right there is a good one to put it. And then message clock fire will happen right after the meet and greet, which is located in the ministry moment. So that's where our clock fire is. And then we can put Pastor Daniel's badge in there, etc. And then closing clock fires need to go before the pre-service looping slides. So that's pretty much it. And that's as easy as it is. It's just dragging, dropping, firing them in the right spot. Once you've built everything out here, it's a lot easier to build it here than it is to build it in the actual service. That's the way I feel about it. So I would suggest doing it the exact same way. It just keeps it cleaner. The most important thing when you're building out content, you want to make sure that you're avoiding mistakes. And the best way to avoid mistakes is to make sure what you're doing is clear and precise. So that's basically how it works. If you have any questions, feel free to reach out to me. You can even put it as a comment to this video, etc. I'd be happy to answer them, and we'll be doing some of these trainings in person, but I wanted to make sure that I was also giving this out in a video form so that you guys were able to see exactly what's happening, and to kind of get a jump on this as well. Or if you weren't able to attend the training, this would also give you a chance to comprehensively kind of go through things. So I'll be creating an updated version of this for intermediate to advanced level shortly. There's a few more things that you can do, that kind of can take your service to the next level. But this is the foundational level, and it's really important that you grasp this foundational level before you go on to the next portion, because it's really important to be able to create clocks that give confidence and not clocks that take away confidence. We want to make sure that we're consistent and precise in the way that we communicate information through our stage displays. So really appreciate you taking the time to walk through this training with me. If there's anything that I could have explained more clearly in certain sections, please give me that feedback. I'm always open to that, and I'm always open to be answering your questions. So thanks again, guys, and hopefully this was helpful. Have a good one.